ever wondered how the human mind works, or why we behave the way we do? Well, today we're diving into 10 psychology facts that will blow your mind and might even change the way you see yourself. So get ready, because we're going straight into the brain, no filter. Let's kick things off with something that might sound familiar. Cognitive dissonance. Ever found yourself in a situation where your actions don't line up with your beliefs? You know that uneasy feeling when you do something that just doesn't sit right with what you stand for? That's cognitive dissonance in action. And trust me, your brain doesn't like it one bit. When there's a mismatch between what we think and what we do, our brain feels that tension, like a little alarm going off in the back of our minds. And here's where things get interesting. Rather than leaving you in that uncomfortable state, your brain works overtime to fix the contradiction. So what does it do? It changes one of those elements usually. It shifts your beliefs, not your actions. This is why we tend to justify behaviors we don't fully agree with, convincing ourselves that it's actually okay, or maybe not so bad. But it's not just about big moral decisions. This phenomenon shows up in our everyday lives too, whether it's eating that extra slice of pizza when we're on a diet or buying something we don't need. Cognitive dissonance sneaks in and helps us feel better about it. So, the next time you catch yourself justifying something that doesn't align with your values, remember, it's your brain trying to restore balance and avoid that uncomfortable feeling of being off. It's pretty clever, isn't it? Next up, let's dive into something fascinating: mirror neurons. Have you ever wondered why you feel connected to someone just by looking at them? It's not some magical force, it's actually your brain at work, mirroring what you see. Let me explain. Imagine you're watching someone laugh. What happens? Chances are, you'll start to smile or laugh too, right? Or if someone's upset, suddenly you feel that heaviness, almost like you're experiencing their emotions firsthand. This is your mirror neurons at work. They fire up and copy the actions, emotions, or expressions of others, literally reflecting what's happening in front of you. This phenomenon is the science behind empathy. It's why we connect with others on such a deep emotional level. Every time you feel emotionally in tune with someone, whether they're joyful or distressed, it's your mirror neurons doing their thing. They're helping you feel what others feel, making us more in sync and connected than we might even realize. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. Now, let's talk about something that's a little more sneaky: the halo effect. Ever met someone who's just incredibly good-looking, and suddenly you find yourself thinking they're not just attractive, but also kind, smart, and totally capable? That's the halo effect at play. What happens here is that our brains make a quick judgment based on someone's appearance, and that first impression tends to influence everything else we think about them. If they look good, we tend to assume they must be good in every other way, whether it's their personality, intelligence, or even how competent they are. It's like their outer glow casts a halo over their entire character. It's a fascinating bias that shows how powerful first impressions can be. But here's the catch. It's a reminder not to judge a book by its cover. Unless, of course, it's a really good cover, right? Now, let's explore one of the most fascinating psychological phenomena: the placebo effect. Have you ever heard about a treatment that's essentially a fake, yet it seems to make people feel better? It might sound unbelievable, but that's exactly what the placebo effect is. Essentially, it's when people experience real physical or emotional improvements simply because they believe they're receiving a legitimate treatment, even when it's just a sugar pill, a saline injection, or a harmless placebo. This goes beyond just a small mental trick. It taps into the incredible power of our mind. When we believe something will work, our brain begins to trigger real physiological changes in our body. We see it in action with pain relief, or patients who are given a placebo but told it was an effective painkiller report significant reductions in discomfort. Similarly, individuals who think they're receiving an antidepressant might experience a boost in mood, even if the pill is nothing more than a placebo. Psychologist Dr. Fabrizio Benedetti, a leading researcher in the field, has found that the placebo effect works not just because of belief, but because our mind and body are deeply connected. The brain releases natural chemicals, like endorphins or dopamine, which can actually help relieve pain or improve mood, just based on the belief that something is helping. This process highlights how the mind can influence our body's health sometimes. Just the expectation of improvement is enough to make it happen. What's even more interesting is that the placebo effect has been observed in a variety of situations, not only in medicine, but also in areas like sports or personal performance. In some studies, athletes who believed they were taking a performance-enhancing drug showed significant improvement, even though they were only given a placebo. This shows that our mental state has a powerful impact on our physical capabilities. So, what's the takeaway here? It's a profound reminder of how much control our beliefs and mindset can have on our physical well-being. The mind-body connection is real, and sometimes the simple act of believing in something can lead to real, tangible changes in our health. It's truly wild, but it's backed by science, and it continues to be a subject of incredible research in the world of psychology and medicine. Let's move on to another fascinating concept: fear of losing. Have you ever noticed that we tend to feel losses far more intensely than gains? It's almost like a punch to the gut. Think about it. If you had $100 and you lost it, you'd probably feel that loss deeply. But if you found $100 on the street, the joy of gaining it might not feel as strong, right? That's a perfect example of how our brains are wired to react to losses. This phenomenon is known as loss aversion, and it's a key idea in behavioral psychology. According to Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky, who developed the theory of prospect theory, losses feel psychologically about twice as painful as an equivalent gain feels good. So, if you lose $100, it hurts far more than the pleasure of gaining $100, even though they're objectively the same amount of money. This is why we're often more reluctant to take risks. We fear losing what we already have, more than the potential to gain something new. Our brains are wired for survival, and in evolutionary terms, protecting what we have, whether it's resources, status, or safety, was far more important than chasing new rewards. The fear of losing triggers our brain's threat response, which activates emotions like anxiety and stress. That's why many of us are so driven to hold on to what we've earned, even if it means passing up opportunities for growth. This explains a lot about human behavior, why we're hesitant to take financial risks, why we often stay in unhealthy situations, or even why some people resist making positive changes in their lives. It's not that we're necessarily afraid of the new, it's the potential loss of the old that can make us paralyzed with fear. In essence, the fear of losing is one of the most powerful drivers behind our decision-making. Our brains are constantly weighing the potential of loss versus gain, and, more often than not, the fear of losing what we have keeps us from taking action. Understanding this psychological bias can help us better navigate both our personal and professional lives. Next up, let's talk about something that might hit a little close to home: the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Ever notice someone who doesn't seem to know much about a subject, but they act like they're an expert? Or maybe you've been in a conversation where someone is unusually confident about something they barely understand. Well, that's the Dunning-Kruger Effect in action. This psychological phenomenon occurs when people with limited knowledge or expertise in a particular area overestimate their abilities. In simple terms, the less you know about something, the more confident you might feel about your knowledge. The theory, named after psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, suggests that individuals with lower skill levels are often unaware of how much they don't know. As a result, they tend to inflate their self-assessment of their abilities. On the flip side, the experts, those who actually have a deep understanding of a topic, are often much more aware of their limitations. The more they know, the more they realize how much there is still to learn. In fact, many experts will downplay their abilities, feeling like there's always more to explore. This creates an interesting gap where the less knowledgeable feel overconfident, and the truly skilled may sometimes feel insecure or uncertain, even though they actually have a far better grasp of the subject. It's not just about knowledge. Gaps, though, the Dunning-Kruger effect, applies to all sorts of fields, whether it's a person thinking they're a great leader after reading a few self-help books, or someone who's just learned the basics of a sport and believes they're already at an expert level. It's a cognitive bias that affects how we assess our competence. So, next time you meet someone who's incredibly confident about something they don't really understand, you'll know what's going on. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect at play, and for the rest of us, it's a reminder to always stay humble and aware of the vastness of knowledge yet to be explored. Now, let's dive into a powerful concept, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Have you ever noticed how your beliefs about yourself or a situation can shape the outcome, even without you realizing it? If you're constantly telling yourself, "I can't do this," or "I'll never succeed," you might be unknowingly making that belief come true. This is the essence of the self-fulfilling prophecy. In simple terms, a self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when a belief or expectation, whether positive or negative, leads you to act in ways that make that belief come true. For instance, if you think you'll fail at something, you might not put in your best effort, or you may become anxious, which increases the likelihood of failure. Essentially, the belief becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. But here's where it gets interesting. The same thing can happen in reverse. If you believe in yourself, even in the face of challenges, you're more likely to take proactive steps, persevere through difficulties, and ultimately succeed. Likewise, when others believe in you, it can have a powerful impact on your performance. Research has shown that when people are encouraged and supported by those around them, whether it's a mentor, a friend, or a teacher, they're more likely to rise to the occasion and meet expectations, sometimes even surpassing them. Psychologist Robert Merton, who first coined the term, explained that the power of belief doesn't just shape how we act, but also how we interpret our actions. This can be seen not just in personal achievements, but also in relationships, workplace dynamics, and even in societal expectations. If society expects certain groups to succeed, their chances of success improve because of the opportunities and support they receive. On the flip side, negative stereotypes can lead to underperformance, as the individuals affected internalize those beliefs. So, here's the takeaway. What you believe about yourself and what others believe about you holds real power. Your thoughts and expectations shape not only your actions, but also the opportunities and support you receive. The self-fulfilling prophecy is a reminder that positivity, encouragement, and self-belief can be a huge driving force in turning dreams into reality. Let's explore a fascinating phenomenon in how we remember things, the primacy and recency effects. Have you ever had a conversation or attended a lecture where you clearly remember the first thing someone said and the last thing they said, but the stuff in the middle, it's not your fault? It's just how our brains are wired. This tendency is explained by the primacy and recency effects. The primacy effect means that we're more likely to remember the first pieces of information we receive. It's like that moment when someone introduces themselves. It's easier to remember because it's the starting point of your interaction. Similarly, the recency effect is when we remember the last things we hear or experience most clearly. If you're sitting through a long presentation, it's likely that the closing remarks or final takeaways will stick with you more than anything in the middle. This happens because our brains are naturally designed to pay extra attention to the beginning and end of experiences. In the case of the primacy effect, the first bits of information get encoded into memory more strongly because they're new, and we haven't processed much else yet. With the recency effect, information is still fresh in our minds, so it's easier to recall. This combination is why first impressions are so powerful. They shape how we see someone from the very beginning. It's also why closing statements in a meeting, speech, or presentation tend to have the greatest impact. The first and last moments are what we remember, and they can make or break our perception of an event. So the next time you're giving a presentation, meeting someone for the first time, or even trying to get your point across, remember, how you start and finish is key. It's not just about what happens in the middle. Those opening and closing moments are what will stick in people's minds long after the conversation ends. Next up, let's dive into something many of us experience: decision fatigue. Have you ever noticed how after a long day of making decisions, you start to feel mentally drained, and suddenly, making even the simplest choices becomes difficult? Maybe you can't decide what to have for dinner, or you just want to avoid making any decisions altogether. Well, that's decision fatigue at work. The more decisions you make throughout the day, the harder it becomes to make good, thoughtful choices. This happens because the mental energy required for decision-making is finite. As you go through your day, your brain gets tired, and it's harder to weigh options or think critically. This leads to impulsive decisions, like grabbing the first thing you see at the store or avoiding choices altogether, like procrastinating on an important task. Psychologists have found that when we're faced with too many choices, especially after a long series of decisions, our cognitive resources start to run low. This can affect both big decisions and smaller, seemingly insignificant ones. For example, famous cases of decision fatigue are often linked to high people, like judges, who make a lot of decisions throughout the day. Research has shown that judges are more likely to make favorable rulings earlier in the day. But as they face more cases, their rulings become more lenient or arbitrary due to fatigue. It's not just about decision-making in work or law either. It's the little choices, too. When you've already made countless decisions by the time you get home, something as simple as deciding what to wear or what to eat can feel like an impossible task. So, if you've ever felt overwhelmed by choices, you're definitely not alone. The key takeaway here: your brain gets tired from decision-making, so it's important to give yourself breaks and find ways to simplify your choices, especially later in the day. It's all about managing your energy and giving yourself space to recharge. Finally, let's explore a powerful psychological phenomenon, the bystander effect. Have you ever been in a situation where something bad happens in public, and even though there are plenty of people around, no one steps up to help? It's a strange and unsettling experience, right? That's the bystander effect in action. The bystander effect is when the presence of others actually decreases the likelihood that any individual will step in to help during an emergency or crisis. You might think that more people around means more chances for someone to intervene, but it's quite the opposite. When there are a lot of people around, everyone tends to assume that someone else will take action. This diffusion of responsibility causes individuals to feel less personally obligated to help. This phenomenon was famously studied after the 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City, where it was reported that dozens of witnesses saw the attack but did not intervene. The case sparked widespread research into the bystander effect. Psychologists Bibb and John Darley conducted experiments showing that when people were alone, they were more likely to help, but when surrounded by others, the likelihood of helping dropped significantly. So why does this happen? One factor is social influence. People look to others for cues on how to behave. If no one else is doing anything, people might assume the situation isn't as serious as it seems. Another factor is pluralistic ignorance, where individuals believe that everyone else is ignoring the problem because they don't think it's an emergency, and they follow suit. The bystander effect doesn't just apply to life or death situations. It can occur in everyday scenarios too, like when someone drops their books in a crowded hallway, and no one offers to help because everyone expects someone else will. Being aware of the bystander effect can help you recognize situations where you might need to step up and take action, even if no one else does. It's a reminder that sometimes taking initiative and being the first to act can make all the difference. And that's 10 psychology facts that could totally change the way you see the world and interact with the people around you. If you found these insights mind-blowing, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more eye-opening content. Until next time, remember, understanding yourself is the first step toward unlocking the mysteries of the world around you. Stay curious and keep exploring.